What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Every time you buff or nerf something, there's always some parts of the game that get indirectly affected. League of Legends balance is all intertwined and all relative, and with the huge changes in the preseason, comes a bunch of hidden changes or indirect changes that happen as a result. A couple days ago we took a look at the hidden buffs of the preseason patch, but there's also a bunch of hidden nerfs. Let's get started. Now the first group of champions that received an indirect nerf on this patch are pure tanks. Think champions who build full tank but have pretty much no damage, or at least damage that isn't relevant in teamfights. And this stems from the fact that AD carries received a huge buff on this patch, and the tank items and champions in general went mostly unchanged. Pure tanks are going to die much faster now, especially in teamfights, and won't be able to play the frontline role as effectively as maybe bruisers can now, who actually benefited from some of the new items and the new masteries and stuff. There's going to be almost no reason to play a pure tank over a bruiser now, when the bruiser brings the threat of actually having a chance at killing an AD carry in a teamfight, unlike the pure tank. As well, the bruiser's dive potential synergizes much better with assassins, and a big part of teamfights now is just going to be trying to kill the AD carry. The items in Keystone Masteries as well for bruisers are insane, whereas for tanks they're a little bit lackluster to say the least. Pure tanks have become almost completely outclassed in this patch. That's not to say that they're bad or useless, it's just that there's better options now. Some of the teamfight initiators will definitely still find a role, as well a lot of the pure tank champions can maybe mix up their builds, include a little bit more damage, and potentially find a new bruiser playstyle. It's just that now tanks are going to be outclassed by bruisers in the Season 6 meta. Now the next type of champion that received an indirect nerf are going to be control and siege based mages. With the meta shifting to become AD carry dominant, assassins are going to play a huge role in this meta. As well, the AD items and masteries are pretty insane for assassins and AD casters. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And those types of champions do a really good job of totally wrecking control and siege mages. Utility mages will still be able to find a place in the meta since they do well versus assassins and they can support their AD carries quite well, whereas burst mages can also find a role by potentially one-shotting AD carries and playing like an assassin. But control and siege mages are going to have a really tough time in pretty much a majority of lane matchups now. Assassins toward the end of Season 5 weren't actually that strong, so these control and siege mages were actually able to dominate the meta quite heavily in Season 5. But now that assassins are definitely coming back into the meta, they're going to have a rough time for sure. Control and siege mages have pretty much always relied on skill shots while also being immobile, and so they get punished quite hard by the hyper-mobile assassins in the game who can not only easily dodge their skill shots, but they can also close the gap and one-shot them. As well, they can shut them down in teamfights in a very similar way as well. It's not just in the laning phase. They can do so through flanks and honestly just through their insane mobility. And overall, the presence of assassins on this patch are going to be a total nightmare for control and siege mages. And lastly, late game champions are also receiving an indirect nerf on this patch. The meta in Season 6 is looking to be much more snowball heavy, with a focus on making games faster to close out once you have a big lead. Although there might be a lot of new mechanics that favor comebacks, there's a lot of things that also prevent you from stalling and make winning a fight much more meaningful and easier to capitalize on. And because of that, the game is going to become much more focused on the mid game, and the first or second team fight is often going to decide the entire game if there's a clear winner. Games are not going to be as likely to reach that 40-minute sweet spot for late game anymore, where you can have that huge scaling build and really ramp up your damage. Although AD carries are definitely receiving a buff, it's likely that it'll favor the mid game and lane dominant AD carries rather than the late game hyper carries for this reason. As well, other late game scaling champions will have a little bit of trouble from being weak in the early game. Now that's not to say late game scaling is a strength of a champion that you want to necessarily pass up on, it's just that it's not going to be worth it to sacrifice early and mid game dominance to have that late game pressure anymore. That's just something that you're probably not going to want to do in Season 6, since most late game champions tend to have either fairly weak early games, fairly weak mid games, or both. And that just about covers all of the indirect nerfs I was able to come up with. I might have missed a few since the patch was honestly gigantic. But that's going to be it, so thanks for watching everybody!
Symptomatic fecal flaws due to twisting gutter clips and bats of fork, then it's time I know it takes a mighty dose of paper. Keep in mind we just skip the ship well far along the way.